The passive voice, forms and functions. The position of the elements of clause structure in a statement usually follows the sequence subject, verb, object, complement, and adjunct. However, there are ways of putting the elements of clause structure in a different sequence in order to give a special emphasis or meaning to the clause or a part of it. Huddleston distinguishes 5 thematic systems of clause. First, voice. Second, extraposition. Third, thematic reordering, fronting postponement. 4. Cleft sentences. 5. Pseudo-cleft sentences. If you want to focus on the person or thing affected by an action, which would be the object of an active form of the verb, you make that person or thing the subject of a passive form of the verb. In this topic, we will study the structure of passive constructions and their use, which is wider in English. Moreover, we will mention some constraints of the passive verb phrase and the passive gradient. First of all, we will focus on the form of passive constructions. For a better understanding of the passive voice, we should distinguish between logical and grammatical categories, being the logical categories agent, action, object, and the grammatical categories subject, verb, object. In the active voice, the category subject is formed by the category agent, whereas in the passive voice, it is formed by the category object. Example given: John, agent, broke, action, the window, object. The window, object, was broken, action, by John, agent. In these examples, we can clearly see that the active-passive relation involves 2 grammatical levels: the verb phrase and the clause. In the verb phrase, the difference between the 2 voice categories is that the passive adds a form of the auxiliary be, followed by the past participle. The tenses and the rules for their use are the same as for active verb forms. Note, however, that we usually avoid saying be, being, and been, being, so that future progressive and perfect progressive passive tenses are very uncommon. In addition, at the clause level, changing from the active to the passive involves rearrangement of 2 clause elements and 1 addition. A. The active subject becomes the passive agent. B. The active object becomes the passive subject. C. The preposition by is introduced before subject. The prepositional phrase agent by phrase of passive sentences is generally an optional element. The active-passive correspondence for a monotransitive verb with an object can be seen diagrammatically as follows. Subject, John, active subject. Verb, admire, active verb. And object, Mary, active object. Passive subject, phrase, Mary as the subject. Passive verb was admired, verb in passive. Optional agent with by agent, which is the agent. Once we have established the basis of passive constructions, we will now study the elements characteristic of these constructions, that is, the passive auxiliaries and the by agent. The passive auxiliaries be, get. The passive auxiliary is normally be. Its only serious contender is get, which, however, is not, by most syntactic criteria, an auxiliary at all. Moreover, get tends to be limited to constructions without an expressed animate agent. The cat got run over. James got beaten last night. Get with an animate agent is not, however, unknown. James got caught by the police. And by the police is in brackets. The get passive is avoided in formal style, and even in informal English, it is far less frequent than the be passive. At the same time, the get passive puts the emphasis on the subject rather than the agent and on what happens to the subject because of the event. Compare, he got taught a lesson, it served him right. He was taught a lesson on the subjunctive by our new got with an asterisk teacher. It is presumably because of the emphasis which get places on the subject reference condition, usually an unfavorable condition, that the agent is less usual with a get passive. This same emphasis may account in part for the fact that the get passive often reflects an unfavorable attitude towards the action. How did that window get opened? Typically implies it should have been left shut. 2. The by agent. Unlike the active subject, the agent by phrase is generally optional. In fact, approximately 4 out of 5 English passive sentences have no express agent. This omission occurs especially when the agent is irrelevant or unknown, as in the Prime Minister has often been criticized recently, or where the agent is left out as redundant. Jack fought Michael last night and Jack was beaten. The use of the agent phrase by Michael would clearly not be necessary or even fully acceptable in this context. Since the agent phrase is usually left unexpressed, the identity of the agent may be irrecoverable, and it may be impossible to postulate a unique active clause corresponding to the passive one. Order had been restored without bloodshed. Colonel Lovell had restored order. The army had restored order. The police had restored order. In some sentences, the agent is not optional. Example given, the music was followed by a short interval, or the music was followed. However, the non-occurrence of the agentless sentence may be due to the fact that without the agent, the sentence becomes informally vacuous. So the second one, when they mark with the asterisk, means that it's wrong, it's not used. Finally, we should distinguish between by and with in passive sentences. He was killed by a heavy stone. A stone fell and killed him. He was killed with a heavy stone. Someone used it to kill him. Considering these rules of passive constructions, we will now refer to the following case. Verbs with two objects. Many verbs such as give, send, show, and lend can be followed by two objects, which usually refer to a person, land, a thing. She gave her sister the car. When the verbs are used in the passive, there are two possibilities. Her sister was given the car, indirect passive, the car equal retained object, or the car was given to her sister. It is more usual in English to make the personal object the subject of the passive voice. The second form would be used when we need to stress this new subject. In American English, the indirect object of the second sentence may lack the preposition to. You were lent £2,000 last year. You were shown all the different ways of making whiskey. Note, after some verbs, the direct object can be followed by an object complement, a noun or adjective which describes the object. They elected him president. I made the room beautiful. These sentences can become passive. He was elected president. The room was made beautiful. Second, sentences with clause objects. The object of a sentence can be a clause. People believed that witches communicated with devil. Nobody knew whether there was gold left in the mine. Passive sentences can be made with that or whether clauses or subject. It is usually used as an introductory subject. It was believed that witches communicated with the devil. Also, that witches was widely believed. It was not known whether there was gold left in the mine. Also, whether there was not known. Note, was widely believed. In the passive voice, it is more usual to put an adverb of manner immediately in front of the past participle it qualifies. This chair is very well made. 3. Or third, verbs with object plus infinitive. Many verbs can be followed by an object and infinitive. She asked me to send a stamped, addressed envelope. I consider Moriarty to be dangerous. Sentences like this cannot usually be made passive. There are a few exceptions. A. Verbs of asking, ordering, or allowing can usually be used in the passive with the following infinitive. I was asked to send a stamped addressed envelope. She was told not to come back. Other verbs in this group advise, expect, forbid, mean, order, request, require, and teach. B. Many verbs of thinking, saying, etc. can be used in the same way. Moriarty is considered to be dangerous. He is known to be violent. Other verbs in this category: believe, feel, presume, report, say, and understand. Note, with say, the infinitive structure is only possible in the passive. Compare. They say that he is famous, not they say him to be famous. That's wrong. He's said to be famous. With the other verbs in this group, too, that structure is more common with the infinitive structure in active sentences. C. Verbs with object plus infinitive without to. A few verbs are followed in the active by an object and an infinitive without to. Examples are hear, help, make, see in the passive. The to infinitive is used. Compare. I saw him come out of the house. He was seen to come out of the house. They made him tell everything. He was made to tell everything. Note, let is the only verb that is followed by a bare infinitive in the passive, but allow usually replaces it. Next, we will refer to the use of passive constructions. The passive is frequently used in English to express ideas that require a reflexive impersonal construction in other languages. Bearing in mind that the passive is far commoner in English than in some other languages, students must know when to use it. Converting active into passive and vice versa may be useful for practice purposes, but the process is essentially an artificial one. The following observations may serve as a general guide. First, indefinite pronoun. When the active form would involve the use of an indefinite or vague pronoun or noun as a subject, we generally prefer to use the passive. The by agent is not expressed. And the examples are: A. I've been robbed. Someone has robbed me. B. The building has to be demolished. They had to demolish the building. 2. Change of subject. The passive provides a means of avoiding an awkward change of subject in the middle of the sentence. The Prime Minister arrived back in London and was immediately questioned by reporters. 3. Impersonal. The passive may be used when we wish to make a statement sound impersonal, out of modesty, or when we have some unpleasant statement to make. Thus, the management of a company might be quite happy to announce, for example, the new working methods we have introduced will result in higher earning for all workers. They may well prefer, however, to use the passive in giving the following information in order to avoid drawing attention to the fact that they themselves are responsible. The new working methods that are to be introduced may result in some redundancies. 4. What happened? The passive is not therefore simply an equivalent alternative to the active. While both forms of expressing an idea may be syntactically possible, we tend to choose the passive form one of the reasons described above. Or if we are interested in what happened to X rather than in what Y did. The escaped convict was arrested 2 days later. 5. Either way, some ideas, however, may be expressed naturally and effectively in either the active or the passive form. In such cases, our choice will depend on what we regard as the focus of interest in the sentence. France beat England in yesterday's Rugby International. England was beaten by France in yesterday's Rugby International. But it is not only its form and its use that we should take into account when using passive constructions. We should also bear in mind some verbs constraint. Thus, we will consider some verbs which do not take the passive and the other way around, verbs which are only passive, not passive verbs. In addition to copular and intransitive verbs, which having no object cannot take the passive, some transitive verbs do not occur, at least in some senses, in the passive. A. Middle verbs feed, have, meaning own or hold, lack, hold, resemble, become, suit. For example, your mother lacks tact. John resembles a Greek god. Note, all those belong to the stative class of verb of being and having, but other stative verbs, such as those of volition or attitude, can easily occur in the passive. The police want him. He's wanted by the police. B. Prepositional verbs. They can often occur in the passive, but not so freely as in the active. Compare the following sentences. They eventually arrived at the expected result, the splendid stadium. The expected result was eventually arrived at the splendid stadium, and the splendid stadium is placed wrong with asterisk. In these sentences, the difference in acceptability can be clearly stated in terms of concrete abstract passive subjects. It is only in the abstract figurative use that go into, arrive at, look into, and many other expressions accept the passive. However, we can say that chairs not be sat on, so the students has to learn one by one which expressions can be used in the passive. Note, transitive verbs with cognate object cannot be put in the passive voice. He smiled a curious smile. B. Only passive verbs. Conversely, with some verbs and verbs constructions, only the passive is possible. For example, John was said, reputed, thought to be a good teacher. Other examples are be born and be drawn in cases where no agent is implied. Examples are he was born in Madrid. His mother bore him in Madrid. The wanted man fell into the water and was drowned, and so drowned him. The verbs which refer to actions that produce finished results are called perfective verbs. The past participle of these verbs, such as a close, break, etc., can have two meanings. One of them refers to a state, and it's more likely an adjective. Finally, we will distinguish passive constructions from other structures which are similar in form by referring to the passive gradient. The purely formal definition of the passive as the clause which contains the construction be or get plus ed participle is very broad. We need to distinguish the following cases. First, central passives. They have an active counterpart and may have expressed agents or may appear without an agent. Examples: this song was written by my father. The problem was solved. 2. Semi-passives. They share verbal and adjectival properties and therefore they represent a mixed or semi-passive class. They are verb-like in having active analogues. Kathy is interested in languages. Languages interest Kathy. But as adjectives, they may coordinate the past participle with an adjective, modify the participle with rather, very, quite, and can be replaced by lexical copular verbs such as seem or feel. Examples: Kathy is very interested in languages. Kathy seems very interested in languages. 3. Pseudo-passives. They have neither an active counterpart nor a possibility or agent addition. They are only considered passives because of the form of the verb. There is a pseudo-passive construction with intransitive verbs or motion or completion in which the participle is active rather than passive in meaning. Why are all these cars stopped at the corner? With most intransitive verbs, this construction has been superseded by the perfective construction, which is almost synonymous. Compare Mary has gone with the archaic Mary is gone. A similar pseudo-passive is used with the verbs of posture. Grandfather was sat in the rocking chair. In this case, the construction is largely synonymous with the progressive construction was sitting. Just to finish the topic, we would like to highlight that a great deal of harm has been done by teaching the passive voice, as if it were merely another way of expressing a sentence in the active voice. We ought to stress the fact that the passive voice has an important and special place in the language. Most sentences that are good in the active voice are just, according to Allen, grotesque curiosities when put into the passive. Bibliography: Carter, McCarthy, 2006, Cambridge Grammar of English, A Comprehensive Guide, Spoken and Written English Grammar and Usage. Collins C., 2005, A Smuggling Approach to the Passive in English. Cohn, Gray, L.S., 2009, Rhetorical Grammar, Longman. Murphy, R., 2012, English Grammar in Use. Swan, M. 2005, Practical English Usage, Oxford University Press. Willis, D. 2003, Rules, Patterns and Words, Grammar and Lexis in English Language Teaching. Van Voort, 2013, A Handbook of English Grammar.